Morning, everyone. The headline we will be addressing this week comes from just last week. I guess we're staying in Washington, D.C. Last week's class was on President Biden's pardon of his son. This week we're in D.C. for swearing on the Mishnah Torah. And this is the fact that Adam Schiff took the oath as a new senator to replace Dianne Feinstein. And even though he was officially starts in January, he was sworn in early for the replacement for Senator Feinstein. So, and he famously made use, he's Jewish, he made use of a Jewish book. Not a Chumash or a Torah, but source number one. This was the Los Angeles Daily News covering the swearing him. Adam Schiff, the outgoing Southern California congressman who gained national attention during Donald Trump's first presidential term, took the oath of office Monday, December 9th, to begin his term as a senator. Schiff held a Maimonides Mishnah Torah while taking the oath of office. According to his office, it is a monumental legal code and one of the most organized, comprehensive, and influential works of Jewish law. The edition used by Schiff Monday was printed in Italy in 1490. So we have a new senator, a new Jewish senator using a Jewish book to take the oath. Now, all sorts of unique caveats that we'll have to address. But suffice it to say that in the Jewish media, the focus was mostly on the Mishnah Torah, was the fact that he used the Rambam's book. So, for example, Jacob Kornblue, who writes for the Forward, and it was covered in the Times of Israel, mostly for the JTA. Schiff, 64, took the oath of office holding Maimonides Mishnah Torah, printed in Italy in 1490. The selection of this text, the 14-volume code of Jewish law and practice written by Moses Maimonides, also known as the Rambam, sparked debate over its halachic permissibility for swearing an oath, as it is not the official Hebrew Bible. A spokesman for Schiff, until this week a U.S. representative, former federal prosecutor, said he chose the volume held by the Library of Congress in part because of his concerns about the state of the rule of law as President-elect Donald Trump returns to office. Spokesperson said that Schiff also attracted to the volume because of his intellectual curiosity. It's simply his nerdy interest in how old this volume is and how comprehensive it is, she said. So we have this, here some of the discussion of, well, could he use a Mishnah Torah to swear on? Which opens up the whole question, how about swearing, oaths in general? Also, what about swearing on the Bible? Also, what is about swearing in oath of office in an American context and swearing on the Bible in an American context? So we're going to unpack these subjects. For example, there is really, I did not look comprehensively, but this idea of there being an oath of office for congressmen is not necessarily something as entrenched as it is to be president. As we'll see a little bit later, presidential oath of office is enshrined in the American Constitution. Same cannot be said for congressmen and senators. And exactly what they say and how that goes about, there has been some change over the years. The oath of office was different after the Civil War because people were committed to their country, but were they committed to the United States of America or the Confederate States? And that's also a very fraught political climate. But we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of taking an oath, swearing on the Bible, and what that's about from a Jewish perspective, swearing in general, how that plays out and when that happens, and also swearing on a Bible or swearing on a Mishnah Torah, swearing on any text, what that's all about. But before we go into some of the sources, any questions, comments, reactions to just the facts as presented?
Yeah, I mean, I want to know, I guess I should know this, but in old times, when there was the Jewish court system, how did they take a shvuah?
Exactly.
What was the shvuah like?
So you've come to the right place, and that is exactly what we will be covering.
Glad I could be a straight man.
Yes, among other related topics. So this idea of an oath to testify truthfully in an American context. It's found in the Federal Rules of Evidence, which is the code that lawyers use, in the justice system in America. Source number 3. Before testifying, a witness must give an oath or affirmation to testify truthfully. It must be in a form designed to impress that duty on the witness's conscience. Right? The idea of, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, is meant to impress upon the person testifying that they really should tell the truth. The idea of swearing, and the idea of swearing truthfully and not falsely, is something that emerges from the Bible. Right? We have in the don't take the Lord's name in vain is the springboard for swearing in God's name to be truthful and not to swear and to be dishonest. And this becomes part of a positive commandment. It is the Federal Rules of Evidence, but very much it's within the biblical context, or because the Rambam says, source number 4, just as there is a negative commandment forbidding an oath taken in vain and a false oath, so too there's a positive commandment for a person who is obligated to take an oath in the court to take that oath in God's name. As it says, and you shall take an oath in his name. This is a positive commandment. For taking an oath in his great and holy name is one of the paths of his service. It is a great measure of glorification and sanctification to take an oath in God's name. So you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, or you shall not swear falsely, but you should swear truthfully when that becomes necessary in God's name. Now, the Rambam, just in the following chapter, in those laws of Shavuot, the laws of oaths, right? The oath versus vow, shvua versus neder. A shvua, an oath, is when you are claiming to do an action. A neder, a vow, has to do with an object. That's the difference in Jewish law. So, I promise to go to the market is a shvua. I'll eat the apple. It's about the apple. It becomes a neder. Although it's an eating is the action, sometimes there's a neder and a shvua in the same statement. That's why we have 2 Talmudic tractates, Shvuot and Nidarim. But the Rambam says there's a mitzvah to swear, but very next chapter in the laws of Shvuot, source 5, it is a great benefit for a person never to take an oath at all. So it's a mitzvah to swear. It's a great benefit not to swear. And this opens up a large discussion within Jewish law, within the commentaries, Nachmanides, for example, in his commentary on Devarim, in the pasuk that the Rambam quoted, is a little bit less forceful in this being a religious obligation. The idea that if it does emerge, it comes up, but the Rambam is definitely more proactive and bombastic. There's a mitzvah to swear truthfully. Others feel, well, if you get into that situation, you better swear truthfully, but there's no positive religious value in the concept of a shvuah to begin with. And in fact, the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat says that there are those who feel yesh omrim. So this is something that not everyone agrees, but some say shebidorot achronim bitlu shvua b'shem. In the later generations, remember, Shulchan Aruch is writing in the 16th century. In the more recent generations, they eliminated swearing with God's name. Lefisha ansho gadol v'nagu lahashpia ba'arur, because it's such a serious violation and punishment if you violate it. So therefore, they had the idea of swearing with an arur. Arur is lower level than a swear. I swear in God's name is one way of taking an oath. Another way of being committed to telling the truth is, let me be cursed if I lie. Arur would be the term. So cursed am I if I'm not telling the truth. It's the negative, not the positive. Some of you may be thinking of the Hatarat Nidarim that we do in our Rosh Hashanah and Erev Yom Kippur, where we annul the vows, where we talk about Bein Bilshon Neder, Bein Bilshon Shua, Bein Bilshon Bishon Arur, V'konam, etc., etc., etc. So there are those. The Arur is a lower level of a declaration of accepting upon oneself a curse. So I'm not telling the truth, but it's not I swear by God's name that I'm telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. So we have, within the context of understanding Jewish law, is it a mitzvah? Is it something of positive religious value? Is it something to avoid? And maybe it's gotten very dangerous because it's a pretty big deal to take this oath in God's name. In terms of how this plays out, more contemporary times. So the Aruch HaShulchan, source number 7. Remember, Aruch HaShulchan is Eastern Europe, turn of the 20th century. And it's, as we said before, Shulchan Aruch is Rabbi Yosef Karo setting the table. Aruch HaShulchan describes how the table gets set. So it goes back to listing the sources from the Talmud through the ages of how Jewish law is working until the contemporary times. And so the Aruch HaShulchan quotes the idea of the Ramah that Nogim lahashpia shvuas hadayanim sha'sefer Torah munach lefana. They say that when you take the shvua, an oath, the Torah is there. Umaniach yodo aleha. You put your hand on the Torah. But you don't hold it in your hands. So, Hirsch, getting to your question, how does the shvua work? The Ramah says you put your hand on an open Torah. This is the same way if you have to take a vow about tax laws, or whether you pay the taxes or collected the taxes and the like. But if a woman is swearing whether or not she collected her ksuba or not, or some of the other areas of Jewish law where an oath would be taken, you can use a different book. So, getting back to Jacob Kornbluth's article in the foreword about Adam Schiff about a controversy, can use another book or not. Clearly, other books were part of the process in taking oaths, depended on the oath. But now the Aruch HaShulchan says in the bold, "Ve'etzleinu haminag hapashut b'chol minei shvuos." What do we do for shvuos? Madlikin neros, we light candles. V'nishba lovesh kittel shehu begen mesim kedei la'ayim alav. You wear the kittel, the shroud of death, so that you feel the awe and fear of the moment. Uposchin ha'aron kodesh, umaniach yado al sefer Torah. You open the ark and put your hand on the Torah, v'nishba, and you swear. V'yesh nagin letzavos ulachalotz min alav. So you should also take your shoes off. The idea that you're standing on holy ground. B'vadei nachal lasos iyumim laharchik mishvuos. You should put a lot of fear and essentially scare people away from taking shvuos. Even if you're swearing to tell the truth, you have to fear God. In Him you should worship. And you should connect to Him. You should swear by His name. As Rashi says in the Chumash, in all of the courts, they try to avoid or push away the litigants from swearing. So, Aruch HaShulchan mentions, look, if you're going to do it, you want to put the fear of God into people because they're swearing by God's name. And for the most part, the litigants are discouraged from swearing because of the significance there. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, 20th century chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and at the end of a discussion about whether a person felt he was definitely in the right and he wanted to take a swear to that effect in order to collect, Rabbi Halevi says, source 9, let me give you advice. Do whatever you can to satisfy the person suing you, meaning it's even worth it for you to pay out. V'al tishba, don't swear. It's almost, so the person is claiming, Rabbi, I'm right. I'm in the right here. I'm ready to swear for to avoid paying. And Rabbi Halevi says, no, pay up. Try to settle. Don't take a vow. Don't take an oath, because that's how serious shvuah is. So the Rambam says it's a mitzvah to swear, but there's a hesitation. Others feel you shouldn't swear. We try to make it as significant as possible to create the right religious mood and sensibility of how significant this swearing is. But practically speaking, it seems that rabbis try to avoid it, the fact that an swear needs to be done, a shvuah is required, opens up a whole discussion in Jewish law that if a swear is warranted, that opens the ability of the Beis Din of the rabbis to try and create a pshara, a settlement, rather than having anybody swear. Questions, comments?
Right. So that the quote that you from the Aruch HaShulchan about strongly discouraging a person from making a shvuah, making them aware of how serious it is, and it sounds a little bit like what the Gemara says in Sota when they were kind of trying to convince the woman accused of being, the woman in the Sota position to going through the process by warning her about all the terrible things that could happen to her. It's like avoiding the final act, kind of to avoid. It sounds like a little bit.
Right. Well, and think about what's taking place there. There's a certain divine manifestation by the story of the Sota, right? The suspected woman there as well. They're going to erase God's name.
Right.
It also promises a certain manifestation of divine influence by a miracle taking place. She'll either die a horrible, strange death, or she'll give birth. And so it's a very good parallel that there's whenever we're in a very divinely suffused setting, you have to be fully aware of that religiously and spiritually and recognize the gravity of that moment.
Right, or the carpenter's rule: measure twice because you only get to cut once. Exactly.
Rabbi,
so, yeah.
How does swearing allegiance to the flag fit into the subject?
So let's hold that, because we have to remember what are the words of that declaration?
I swear allegiance to the
Isn't
flag.
it? I pledge allegiance to the flag.
Pledge allegiance.
So we're gonna analyze a little bit some of the changes that can get made and how that impacts from a Jewish legal perspective. For now, this is the idea of I swear while holding on to something, holding on to a religious object by the name of God. So there's kind of when we talk about things outside of the Jewish context, if the word swear is not used, if we're not using a religious object to place our hands on or be in the presence of, as well as we don't utter God's name, which then opens up something we've seen in other contexts, is the name God inherently holy, right? Swearing to God, is that the same as using the name that we use when we pray? It's a separate discussion. But so we're going to get there. First, let's take a look at, we've seen, in many ways, this is very much like the federal rules of evidence. We want people to appreciate the gravity of the moment so that the truth comes out. In Judaism, it involves God's name and it involves holy objects. But where does this come from? So everyone in the Talmud traces it back to Avraham and Eliezer. Avram says to his servant that when he's sending him to find a wife for Isaac, he wants him to swear that he'll get the job done. And he says to him, put your hand under my thigh. And commentaries try to understand what kind of expression is this. So Rashi quotes the Talmud. Whoever takes an oath must take his hand on some sacred object, such as a scroll of the law or tefillin. That's what the Gemara in Shavuot says. As circumcision was the first commandment given to him and become his only through much pain, it was consequently dear to him, and therefore he selected this as the object upon which to take the oath. Right? Avram didn't have tefillin, he didn't have a Torah scroll. The only religious commanded object he had was his bris milah, the area of circumcision. So when he said, grab me under the thigh, he was talking about grabbing him by where he had been circumcised. As strange as that may seem to us, or even blatantly inappropriate, that was the way to do things. And so other commentaries talk about some of the other methods or mechanisms or for swearing and what people would do. The idea of the idea of like we have a handshake. So we have a handshake, and they had holding on to something, the thigh, the leg, whatever it was. They try to understand it more from a anthropological situation. But the rabbis have this idea from here that you hold holy objects when swearing. So the Gemara in Shavuot, the judge, source number 10, the source that Rashi quotes, the judge who administers an oath by the Lord, the God of heaven, without instructing the litigant to grasp a sacred item, is considered like the one who made a mistake with regard to a matter that appears in the Mishnah. The ruling is revoked. The litigant must repeat the oath. The rabbis really feel you have to hold a holy object. Now, it doesn't tell you what the holy object is specifically. And so, the Rambam says it's going to be something that the person holds a Torah scroll in his arm while standing and swears by the name or substitute for the divine name. Right, we have to figure out our holy objects. Torah and tefillin seem to, take the prized roles because it has all of the Judaism in it, or the tefillin is a holy object. The mezuzah is on the wall. You're not going to take it off the wall. And so therefore, there seems to be, it does not seem to be as clear a directive as what has to be held, other than something should be held in a way that it draws your attention to the significance and severity or the solemnity of what you're doing, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Now, one of the things that comes up, and this is what Al mentioned, is what about other types of language? And here we come to so one of the questions that is often asked when Jews are brought into a courtroom: do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? What's a Jew supposed to do? If you're ready to swear, swear. But we also see a certain hesitation towards swearing. Also, when you say "so help me God," which God? Hand on a Bible, which Bible? So there was a case that took place in England where the civil servants had to take an oath of office, and it was part of the code that they had to have different Bibles on hand for the different religions. You could have the King James version for the Christians, and the Old Testament for the Jews, and the Quran for the Muslims. That there should be a recognition that it's not meant to be one size fits all. We already see this in the Constitution, because when the Constitution, when it talks about the presidential oath of office, source number 12, Article 2, Section 1, before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. It's not just a shvuah, it's also a declaration. I solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will do the best of my ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. The "so help me God" is optional. Not everyone believes in God. But this idea of swear or affirm opens up the possibility that not everyone wants to swear. And this is not just a Jewish concept, it's a Christian concept. There's a significant literature and analysis and study as to the Christian view of swearing on a Bible and the like. Remember, they also have the 10 Commandments. The third, don't take the Lord's name in vain. And so affirming is something that was already understood by our founding fathers in America to be something of a parallel alternate, that we want people to appreciate the significance and solemnity of their words, even if they have a religious hesitation against swearing. I noted there in the source sheet that President Franklin Pierce was the only president to affirm and not swear back in 1853. Now, everyone who may have forgotten or never knew there's a Franklin Pierce who was president, and he's the only one to affirm. Maybe he'll appear in jeopardy at some time. This idea of creating or having alternative options, recognizing that everyone's willing to swear, may also have a bit of a religious context, and be part of what we've been saying, that we said, it was mentioned before by the Aruch HaShulchan, that an oath should be a big deal. A shvuah is a big deal, and if you don't think it's a big deal, then maybe you shouldn't be swearing. We don't want people to just be, I swear, I swear, I swear. That's not a Jewish concept, because we really have this religious subtext that's part of this. Is a religious awareness that goes along with swearing. As the Midrash points out, it's in Parshat Matot, where they talk about speaking truthfully, where it says all time and again, lo yachel devaro, don't change your words, which also can be understood as your words should not be profane, chulin. Your words can't be ordinary, they have to be sanctified. So the Midrash says, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, do not think that it is permitted for you to swear in my name, even if it is true. Right? This is more Ramban as opposed to the Rambam that we saw earlier. You may only do so if you have within you the following qualities. You have to be God-fearing like Avraham, Iyov, and Yosef. You must fulfill, him shall you serve. You must cleave to him. Really, it's a religious awareness that is a prerequisite to the swearing. So you're thinking back to the Aruch HaShulchan in terms of lighting the candles and wearing the kittel, this idea of creating the religious awareness, that's not just about fear, it's about recognizing that when you swear in the name of God, it's supposed to be suffused with religious feeling and inspiration. And this might be based upon the idea, the Gemara in Shavuos, which is where it talks about oath, source number 14. The entire world trembled when the Holy One, blessed be he, said at Mount Sinai, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For the Lord will not hold guiltless one who takes his name in vain. Right? When it says, you shall not, don't take the Lord's name in vain, there was a lot of thunder and lightning. It's a big deal. There's a religious feeling that comes with invoking God's name. And that it could be that one of the reasons we're not as open to shvuot, of oaths anymore, swearing this way, is maybe we don't have that same level of religious feeling. Rabbi Chaim Jachter, the rabbi from New Jersey, teacher TABC, actually mentions this passage in source number 15 from Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik in connection to this. The idea that, on some level, we don't have the same religious fervor and feeling and awareness of previous generations, and that's something that's been in decline for a long time. If you're suffused with religious feeling, fervor, and faith, you can take an oath, you can swear. Otherwise, maybe it should be avoided. And Chaim Soloveitchik is talking about this famous article, Rupture and Reconstruction, where he talks about how the contemporary Jewish community has changed. And after the Holocaust, before the Holocaust, the Jewish tradition was more mimetic and instinctive, and people went with what they saw, and they just, what he calls mimetic. You follow the tradition of your ancestors. But then there was a rupture. A Holocaust tore that all apart and ripped that away. And so the reconstruction means going back to the books to recreate it again. And when you're recreating from the books, it's not going to have the same familiarity. It's going to have, it's going to be much more technical. And this is how it describes what some are calling the shift to the right and the focus on chumrah and stringency. But at the end of the article, he says it's not just about the practice of Judaism, it's also about the feeling and the faith of Judaism. In 1959, I came to Israel before the high holidays. Having grown up in Boston, never having had an opportunity to pray in the Haredi yeshiva, I spent the entire high holiday period from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur at a famous yeshiva in Bnei Brak. The prayer there was long, intense, and uplifting, certainly far more powerful than anything I had previously experienced. And yet, there was something missing, something that I'd experienced before, something perhaps I'd taken for granted. Upon reflection, I realized that there was introspection, self-ascent, and even moments of self-transcendence, but there was no fear in the throng student body, most of whom were Israeli born. I grew up in a Jewishly non-observant community and prayed in a synagogue where most of the older congregants neither observed the Sabbath nor even ate kosher. They all hailed from Eastern Europe, largely from Shtetlach, like Shpetovka and Shpeshok. Most of their religious observance, however, had been washed away in the sea change, and the little left had further eroded in the new country. Indeed, the only time the synagogue was ever full during the high holidays. Even then, the service was hardly edifying. Most didn't know what they were saying, and bored wandered in and out. Yet at the closing service of Yom Kippur, the Ne'ilah synagogue filled and a hush set in upon the crowd. The tension was palpable and tears were shed. Their tears were courtroom tears, with whatever degree of sincerity such tears have. Courtroom tears, Shavua tears. What was absent among the throng students of Bnei Brak in their contemporary services, and lest I be thought to be exempting myself from this assessment, absent my own religious life too, was the primal fear of divine judgment, simple and direct. It's Hashem Elokecha Tira. That's the verse that we're talking about. To be sure, there are seasons of the year, moments of crest in the religious cycle, when God's guiding hand may be tangibly felt by some and invoked by many. And there are certainly occasions in the lives of the most when the reversals are so sudden or the stakes so high and the contingencies so many that the unbeliever prays for luck and the believer more often calls for his help. Such moments are only too real, but they are not the stuff of daily life. And while there are always those whose spirituality is one apart from that of their time, nevertheless, I think it's safe that the perception of God as a daily natural force is no longer present to a significant degree in any sector of modern Jewry, even the most religious. Indeed, I would go so far as to suggest that individual divine providence, though passionately believed as a theological principle, and I do not for a moment question the depth of that conviction, is no longer experienced as a simple reality. The fact that we don't have that same feeling of divine immanence that was initially part of our tradition, and that has eroded over time, and maybe understandably so in the modern era. But if that's a prerequisite for a Shavua, for this religious swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, while holding on to a religious object with an awe and an awareness of the divine, well, if you don't have that, maybe you shouldn't be swearing, and that could be another approach. From a rational point of view, from a law and order point of view, this is a mechanism to get the job done. But it might not necessarily, be as relevant as it used to be, and therefore we do what we can to get to the truth and to get to justice. But this religious aspect of the Shavua may have less relevance or resonance than it once had, not from just a technical legal perspective, which, by the way, does not have as a straight a path in terms of swearing with God's name by holding a holy object. We see how that developed in Jewish law and tradition. But from a theological state, if you take the theological temperature of the Jewish nation at this time, even the most religious or observant communities don't have that feeling, that depth of theological conviction that is a prerequisite for swearing. So, if Adam Schiff didn't really fulfill the obligation using the Mishnah Torah, it will be okay. Also interesting, the whole idea with regards to these swearing in ceremonies. There's certain rules about you can't have photography in the chamber. So if you notice, these are usually done in the offices, and there are different ways, but that's just a side point. So, maybe, as I was thinking, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Maybe the most important part of that oath is what you think about when you say, so help me God. And if you don't have that piece as much, then maybe the swears and the oaths can also fall by the wayside, even as we try to remain committed to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, finding ways to do so even without the Shavua in its original pristine form, or the various accoutrements that were added over the generations to make it more binding. So we'll have to see what, as other Jewish members of Congress take their oath of office, whether they'll be as creative as Adam Schiff, or find other things. If you go looking back other places, some have used different Tanakhs and the like. As we said, no legal requirement, may not have as much of a halachic requirement, maybe we spend a little bit more time on the so help me God. Happy to take any questions or comments.
What is mimetic? Did you use this word?
Yes, mimetic. So this is Chaim Soloveitchik's article. Rupture and Reconstruction was a big caused a big reaction when it came out. He was trying to first off, his last name is pretty prominent. He's Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik's son, so he the Rupture and Reconstruction. He describes that pre-World War II. Even the Jewry was very mimetic, from copy. People kept kosher because they followed what they had seen in their parents' home. People went to shul the same way their fathers went to shul. They didn't necessarily have a book tradition. They didn't have an educational tradition. No one really went to Jewish schools for the most part. So the Jewish masses were following the mimetic tradition. From the word mime, right? The mimes who do that without talking even.
To copy somebody.
Correct. So there was very much, that's how Jewish tradition was passed from generation to generation. There was more literacy, let's say. Jews knew how to read. They could read the Siddur, they could read the Chumash, they could read Tehillim. Didn't really understand any of it per se. It was only the elite who had the opportunity to go to schools and be educated. But for the most part, right, even people who didn't know couldn't explain the why, they knew how to kasher the chicken because they watched their mother kasher the chicken.
Right.
They knew how to put on tefillin from watching their father put on tefillin. They knew things from watching it and then doing it. And so he said, he posits, I think correctly, because I don't think it was only just during the Holocaust, but rupture to that type of a society, which took place during World War II, where you don't have grandparents educating being able to model for their grandchildren anymore. You don't have the same level of ability to just watch Judaism be practiced and practice it yourself. Requires a reconstruction. And how that Judaism was reconstructed post-World War II was through going back to the sources, going back to the texts. And when you go back to the text, you're going to have things, some of the shortcuts or the rough edges that were smoothed out by mimetic practice can be found anymore. It's something. It's like some people just know how to paint a picture, but others have to follow the dots and the numbers and everything like that. And so he felt that when that happens, it's not straight. It's not surprising that the Jewish community becomes a little bit more focused on the details, which may lead to certain stringencies being more widely known and practiced and accepted.
Right.
I remember talking to a kid in Ramaz that my daughter was teaching. Lovely kid, loving family. And I said, "Oh, have you been to the Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills where your grandparents are?" He said, "No, I'm so busy." Like the truth is they have a close relationship, but everything was, school centered because the schools were trying to keep the people religious. As an example of Ramaz, you wanted to do sports, keep on with everything. And he had never been there. I wanted him to look at something which was in memory of my 3 months had not been there. It's very good. This word rupture, it really such a good word.
Well, and I think that if you look throughout Jewish history, where there were ruptures, there were reconstructions. Right, the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash led to the Mishnah. Right, the expulsion from Spain led to the Shulchan Aruch. Right, the Khmelnytsky massacres, or Shabtai Tzvi False Messiah, Hasidic movement. So you have you can say so whenever there have been setbacks, there have been steps forward. Those steps forward were constructed differently, and so he specifically talks about World War II, but that idea in terms of the divine, the sense of religious feeling has changed. He's comparing a non-observant synagogue population in Boston having more sense of the divine or fear on Yom Kippur than B'nai Brak yeshiva. And so I think that's an experience that we can connect with, and it's specifically as we're talking about swearing. The oath has gone from being an acknowledgement, a connection with divine immanence, to a more technical legalistic concept. And maybe that's what led to its dissuading from invoking it, because if you're going to invoke it, so help me God, you really should be meaning that. That's the most significant piece. Because from a legalistic perspective, we can settle this without the shvur.
It's a great article, that rupture and reconstruction. Gita always says, not to be too morbid about it, but Gita always says, we don't have a lot of minhagim around a shiva and a velus, because their parents were wiped out in the Holocaust. We didn't see them sitting shiva. We don't know what particular minhagim they followed, and so we have to kind of make it up and invent it as we go along. We're the people of the book, I guess. Right. And so it's that's just emphasized by this article. It's a great article.
One very interesting sociological thought that I've observed in the non-Orthodox population. In my parents' generation, many people kept kosher because they wanted their parents to eat at their house. And for many, after their parents died, they stopped keeping kosher. Now I see many young people who are not Orthodox just don't even bother. It's evolved to that extent.
There are other factors at play, besides rupture and reconstruction. Assimilation plays a major role. How engaged one is within modernity plays a certain role. I know that observation, Phyllis, that you mentioned, brings somebody. Shlomo Carlebach tells a story about seeing a Jew in Jerusalem with payas, right, the side locks down to his waist. And he said, "What do you do with side locks down to your waist? It seems a little bit extreme. You see Hasidim, it's long, but it's not that long." He says, "No, you don't understand. If I wear my pants down to my waist, my children will wear it to their shoulders, and my grandchildren will wear it to their chins, and then my great-grandchildren will have longer pants, and then my great-great-grandchildren will have it just to the required amount." There's kind of sometimes, this sense of religious connection, can weaken over time.
It sounds like the old story. The great grandfather was Shlomo. His son was Stuart. The next son was Sean, and the great grandson was Shlomo again.
Right. It's
Right.
similar to the when they tell about the idea of Shabbos to Shabbat to Sabbath to Saturday. Right. So you read Asadoros. There's an acknowledgement that it's difficult to maintain, but as difficult as the observance is to maintain, certainly the religious feeling, and maybe that's what's behind the concept of swearing and shvua, in the Jewish tradition, and that in addition to commitment to truth, we're looking for that commitment to the so help me God.
Rabbi, what's lo yachel devaro? What was that?
Lo yachel devaro means you shouldn't change your words, but also the rabbis say don't make your words chulin, don't make them secular. They should always be suffused with meaning.
I see.
Yeah.
And this Rabbi Chaim, is he still alive? Soloveitchik?
Chaim Soloveitchik is still alive. Yeah, he recently did a talk on the West Side with Saul Berman about 40 years since rupture and reconstruction. Every time there's kind of a milestone, people talk about it again. I followed some of the the coverage and the writings about it. I think basically things that stay the same. People in the middle are still kvetching about people who have gone shifted to the right, and there's still only a few lonely men of faith stuck in the middle. Well, everyone's to the right or the left. The more things change, the more they stay the same. All right, please God, we'll pick it up next week.
If you give me a pair of tefillin and you put me near Adam Schiff, I don't know what I'm going to do with those leather strips. So just don't do one. Thank you. Very nice. Beautiful.
You're welcome.